The Central African Republic's interim president, Catherine Samba-Panza, says those behind the wave of violence in the country were trying to stage a coup. Samba-Panza was forced to return home from the UN General Assembly in a bid to end days of violence. Media and security consultant David Smith joins us via Skype from South Africa to shed more light on this issue. Many thanks for joining us at this time. Samba-Panza's alarm about those perpetrating the violence being coup leaders who wanted to, well, rather men who wanted to stage a coup. How much of it is true?
Well, I think there's a big similarity here between the story you just finished with on Burkina Faso, where we wondered whether or not Gendere was linked to ousted President Blaise Compaoré in that country. Well, Catherine Samba-Panza in the Central African Republic is putting a lot of the blame on the ousted president of her country, Francois Bozizé, saying that she believes his fingers have been pulling the strings on a lot of the violence in the capital and elsewhere in the country. And you asked me the question whether or not I think this is true. I'd have to say I do indeed. You know, only a couple of days ago, a number of rebels from the anti-Balaka movement, a rebel group that's believed to be instructed by ousted President Bozizé, staged a raid on the National Police headquarters and elsewhere in the country. One of the people allegedly killed, according to the interim prime minister, was an anti-Balaka leader who used to be the head of the Presidential Guard in Bozizé's administration before he was ousted. So yes, I do think that the ousted president, who himself came to power in a coup back in 2003 when he knocked over then President Ange-Félix Patassé, is trying to get back in power the same way he came to power in the first place.
Had called for the resignation of Samba-Panza and the removal of UN peacekeepers. Now, one could possibly understand the removal of peacekeepers, but what about Samba-Panza?
Well, I don't think that would make any difference, because she is in a position that whoever was in the position of transitional president, interim president, would have very little power. She's in what I call a lame duck position. She doesn't really have the tools that any normal head of state would have at their disposal to run a country. You know, I remind you that the Central African Republic has no functioning army. It has no functioning national police force. It has an education and a health system that barely exists. There's almost no infrastructure outside the capital city, Bangui. And if one remembers that the country is predominantly rural, Bangui is not a big city. Most people live in rural areas. The government presence outside Bangui is almost non-existent. So if she was to be replaced, it would make very little difference. What the country needs is an elected government that is responsible to the people because it has a mandate from the people. And until that happens, it's not very likely that anybody in power in the Central African Republic is going to make much of a difference. Right now, security is provided by foreigners, by the UN peacekeeping mission and by the French military force Sangaris. And until there's an operating national army, it's going to have to stay that way.
But an elected government, when it comes into power, still have to build these structures that you're talking about. So in the light of Catherine Samba-Panza's helplessness, shouldn't regional leaders take more effective control of what's happening in the Central African Republic?
Well, put in those terms, I can only say yes. I think we need to rethink the way peacekeeping operates in the Central African Republic. Remember, this current UN peacekeeping mission is just one in a long series of peacekeeping missions that have been in the country on and off since the mid-1990s. There was another UN peacekeeping mission in the CAR from 1998 to 2000 called MINURCA. And since then, there have been regional ECAS forces, there have been African Union forces, and none of them have made much of a difference. The country is still in a crisis. What we need is something that not only tries to bring stability to the country, but also gets involved in nation building, creating the tools that a sovereign state needs in order to function properly.
Well, earlier you said to me that Catherine Samba-Panza doesn't have the required tools to lead. Why then was she made the leader?
Well, there has to be somebody in at least nominal charge of the country. I mean, there's a question of humiliation. I mean, there have been arguments that perhaps the country should be run completely by some sort of foreign entity. There was talk, and there continues to be talk of the United Nations running a transitional administration in the Central African Republic, as it has in other places, such as Kosovo in Eastern Europe, East Timor in Asia. They did that in Cambodia for a time as well. But to have a UN transitional administration means there's no confidence in the local population to run their own affairs. So what we've got here is a bit of a hybrid operation, a compromise in which a transitional administration holds the fort while plans are put in place to put in something stronger. The real purpose of Catherine Samba-Panza and the transitional administration is simply to prepare the ground for national elections so that a new government with a mandate from the electorate can take over and begin the slow process, and yes, it is a slow process, of building a state.
Now, the most recent round of violence in the Central African Republic is raising fears about a resurgence of the Muslim-Christian clashes in that country. Now, why do you think the interim government hasn't been able to bring about a sort of integration program in the country in the interim?
Well, the short answer to that is, again, they don't have the tools to do so. It takes an infrastructure that's spread throughout the country. Remember, the Central African Republic is a country the size of France and Belgium combined. When the Seleka rebels marched into Bangui in March 2013 from the far northeast of the country, along the way, they attacked all municipal offices in towns and villages, destroying public records. They destroyed birth certificates, death certificates, property registration. So there's really not much left at the disposition of the government to work with. We don't even really know how many people live in the Central African Republic because the records were destroyed. There's a census being carried out right now, but that census is probably going to be incomplete when it is finished, mainly because there aren't enough people to go to all the places where the Central Africans live. And let's also not forget that a big part of the Muslim population no longer lives in the Central African Republic. They're living as refugees in neighboring countries like both Congos and Chad because they fear for their lives through attacks by anti-Baleka.
And security consultant would like to thank you for your insight on TVC News Hour. Many thanks.
My pleasure.